Welcome to the next video in the series on Sqlite programming. In this video I'm going to show you how to use Sqlite with Python. Now Python is an open source programming language, freely downloadable to most platforms, and it's actually used by the Google App Engine and the folks at Google as well, so it's become quite popular over the last number of years. Alright, let's get into it. Python actually comes with Sqlite baked in, so you just have to start up the Python interpreter. So you go like this, Python. Pretty straightforward. Alright, there we go. So you'll notice that it's Python version 2.5, and you can do various other things. Now, Sqlite comes baked into Python, so you don't have to install anything else. You simply go import Sqlite 3, and that now, that gives you access to the Sqlite 3 API. Now in Python you have, just like in any other language that binds to Sqlite, you have a small number of APIs. You have a connect API that creates a new database file or opens an existing one and gives you a handle to the database. You have an execute API, which executes your SQL statement, and then you have a close API to close the database. In addition, there's a cursor object in Python that lets you iterate through the results. And that's more or less it. So let's walk through a couple of examples. Okay, so you go, the connection, that's a database connection, equals Sqlite 3 dot connect, and I'll call it B. Whoops. Alright. And now if I look at the connection object, it says it's an Sqlite 3 connection object. In fact, if I quit out of Python, and if I do python star.db, and I'm looking in my file system now, you'll see that there's a new file, and it's just been created. So I'll go back into Python again, and I'll say, connection equals Sqlite 3 connect to the Python Sqlite DB. Alright. Whoops. Oh, I have to go import, that's right. Import, and then connect. Okay. So now that I've done that, I'm actually going to create a cursor. So I'll just say C equals con dot cursor. And don't show this message again. There we go. Gotta love Windows. Okay, so now you have a cursor object. And if I dump the cursor object, you'll see it's an Sqlite 3 cursor. The next thing to do is to create a table and then add some content to the table. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go c.execute. And in here I'm going to execute an SQL statement to create a table. So I go create table. This is just standard SQL from SQLite. Test, and it'll have an ID, which is an integer, and a name, which is text. Oops, and that's about it. Okay, so now it's created this table. Yeah, I know, I have to prove it, but we'll get to that in a bit. Now what I'm going to do is insert a few things into this table. So I'll go insert into test, that's the table, values 1j. Okay, so that's right from here to here is the SQL statement that I want it to execute, and it executes it. And what it does is it adds a row into the table with 1 and j. I'll do a few more rows. Do 2 and k. I'll do 3 and ray. Okay, so then, actually before I do that, now in programming, obviously you're not going to build strings every time. You actually want to, be able to have a generic statement and pass in values. So you can bind parameters. And the way to do that is instead of specifying the values, you just do question marks, and then at the end of it you can pass in a structure with let's say for and may. Whoops. Okay. So what I've done is I'd say insert into test the values question mark, and for the first one you put in a for, and the second one you put in may. And again, it gets in. Believe me, it gets in. Another thing you can do is when you program, you may have values coming in from other parts of the program in variables. So, for example, let's say you do new ID equals 5. Right? It says it's 5. Let's say you do new name equals Shay. Right, and it's Shay. And then you go, where am I? C.execute. So instead of putting in actual parameters, I'll just say new ID and new name. And it got into the database. Now, this video is kind of useless unless I can prove that. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to execute a statement that that queries the database. So I'll go, select star from test. Okay, so now I have a cursor object. Now what I'm going to do is iterate through the cursor. Oh, sorry, before I do that, actually, I have to assign that result to something, so I'll call it my rows equals. Okay, and if I do my rows, dump it out, it's a cursor object, which is good. Okay, so then I'll go for row in my rows, colon, this is Python, so you have to indent, print row 0. So SQLite returns an array of arrays. So the first row in my rows is this row variable is the first array, and in that first array you're picking out the first element, which is the ID, and then you pick out the name, which is row 1. And then if you return, you say, hey, great. Now what's interesting is it shows 1J, 2K, 3Ray. Now if you remember from earlier on, for May was done by binding hard-coded parameters, and the fifth one was done by binding variables. So that proves that binding variables and the inserts and the create table all works. The next thing I'm going to show is in the select statement you can also have a parameterized. So for example, select star from test where name equals question mark. Okay, now what I've done here is name is the bound parameter, and in the bound parameter I'll just put new name. Okay, which we remember was set to something. I think it was Shay. So let's have a look. Everything executes fine. If you go my rows, it's a cursor. So then we'll go and print off for row in my rows, print row, somewhere in there, there's a row 0. Come on. Alright, print row 0 and print row 1. And bingo, it's Shay, because if you remember, new name was set to Shay. So in this video I've shown you that you can create a table, you can insert values into a table, you can insert values with bound parameters, you can query the table using a select statement, and you can do selects with bound parameters. Those are the basic operations of using SQLite. If you want to get into anything more advanced, you really have to look at the SQLite API and the SQL API to do more advanced things like multiple tables and joins and whatever else. So that's basically the video. If you enjoyed it, please rate the video, and post a comment if you'd like to. When you do that, it actually makes the video easier to find in YouTube and wherever else. And that's